What's up, guys? Connor O'Hanlon here again, and this is episode number 4 of the Con O Show. And today we're going to be going over corporate media bias, liberal media bias, all that stuff, and what I perceive as the liberal media myth, as you will see as this episode is titled. First of all, I'd like to say if you haven't already, you can check out the first 3 episodes. They're all on Spotify, on Anchor, and hopefully I can get them on some more platforms. So if you haven't already, there's 3 other episodes that you can check out if you enjoy this one. You can follow me on Twitter at Con O'Hanlon, CONOHANLON, or you can follow the show on Facebook at The Con O Show. And by sharing, that will help grow the audience, and we can help get the progressive movement larger and grow the audience to hear this stuff. And if you have any suggestions for topics, if you have any suggestions for guests, please do let me know, and I will do my best to accommodate that. But for today, we're going to be going over news media bias and how I perceive these things and different networks and all that stuff. But I'll probably start by saying that the vast majority of the analysis is going to be about, let's say, TV media rather than print media. It could be online media as well, but let's more focus on the mainstream media. I I don't have as extensive of a knowledge of all the different print medias. Obviously know certain ones. So saying that the Wall Street Journal has a slight right wing tilt. That's not. I don't think that's controversial at all. And saying that the New York Times has a slight left leaning one, but that's what we'll discuss in this episode. Is that saying that something has a slight left leaning thing does not make it liberal media. So, what is my overall thesis of my media analysis? I would say that, generally speaking, liberal media does not exist. So, why do I say that? Well, what is considered liberal media? Well, depends who you ask, I guess, but if you're talking to a conservative, it'd basically be anything other than Fox News. Okay, well, that's a pretty broad spectrum of opinions and outlets that could possibly be under that. So obviously I'm not going to include anything in that because that's just ridiculous. Maybe you could say that CNN and MSNBC are left-leaning. I would say that MSNBC has some sort of left-leaning tendencies, but it's not left or liberal per se. The difference is obviously a definitional difference of saying what is liberal, what is leftist, what is all this stuff. So if you're talking about individual anchors on MSNBC, CNN, whatever, yes, you will find some people that are Democrats, right? You will find people that are left-leaning. Now, you don't find people that are social democrats or democratic socialists or leftists or anything like that, generally speaking. Every once in a while you see one that's a guest on a show. But, if your barrier of, who is an extreme leftist on media is Chris Cuomo or Don Lemon or Rachel Maddow, then clearly you've never interacted or talked to someone that is actually on the left. And that's not to be a fallacious and say they're not on the left. They are. But when you're talking about having a liberal bias or a leftist bias, they're not they're very low on what their bias would be in saying leftist or liberal. That's also not to say that a news outlet is then 100% biased if they have people with opinion pieces that are biased to one side, right? So, if you say that Fox News is conservative media because all the people on the network that have opinion pieces are conservative, you wouldn't necessarily be wrong. Well, what's the difference? Well, if you compare, let's take CNN. They have a much wider range of hosts than Fox News. Fox News has the most left-leaning person is probably Chris Wallace, who is, let's be honest, he's not left-leaning in any imaginable sense of the word. They used to have Shepard Smith, but they fired him, or he left. So the difference is that the overall narrative of the network for Fox News is to push the conservative agenda, and more particularly, the Republican agenda. And that is different, generally, than a pure conservatism or pure right-wing viewpoint. They overlap significantly. And I would say, but the difference is that you can have your bias, their conservative bias. But the second that Donald Trump changes, the vast majority of the pieces on that network change, right? It's kind of mind-boggling, but that's how a lot of these party outlets kind of work. It's kind of more like state media, honestly, Fox News is. Now, we can compare Fox News to MSNBC, because that's a lot of the people that draw that comparison. Well, if Fox News is, right-wing, or Fox News is conservative, or whatever, I think Fox News is the Republican Party outlet, then MSNBC is just as bad, because they promote all the Democratic stuff, right? Well, you wouldn't be significantly far off, but let it be known that there can be no false equivalency between MSNBC and Fox News. Fox News has put out significant amounts of lies, and they cover for a president that lies all the time. Okay, so MSNBC, yes, they have a bias. Yes, they have a slant, and it's more towards the Democratic Party, and it's pushing more of the Democratic Party's bias. And that's because a lot of the anchors on there had that bias. What separates that from being purely the Democratic Party's outlet is that they shifted significantly into adding a lot of conservative outlets or conservative hosts, and they have a lot of conservative people. And here's another, it's a little bit of a thorn in my side, is because if you watch MSNBC, the most, quote, liberal or leftist outlet, you're more likely to hear someone defend, let's say, a conservative Republican over a left-leaning or, social democratic Democrat. And that ties into the overall narrative of the incentivization of why they do that. The reason why MSNBC does that, and they have Republicans on, is because they're trying to appeal to a larger audience. And they're trying to appeal to a specific audience that still watches cable news. Fox News is the largest mainstream media news outlet, if you can call it that, because they have a right-wing slant. They appeal to older people, and they've had those older people for 10, 20 years. Young people, they don't really watch cable news. You might, if you're listening to this, you might, but the vast majority of younger voters, say people under 50, do not watch cable news. And if they do, they're going to be less likely to watch Fox News or MSNBC or CNN. They're probably just going to watch, like the highlights maybe here and there. They get their news from online sources, they get it from social media, and you can disagree with that stuff and you can think that there's a problem. I would tend to agree with you in some sense, but there's no authoritative mainstream media outlet that has the support of younger people. So what MSNBC is trying to do is cut off some of Fox News' people, and Fox News just does its own thing because it has its business model set out and it's paid for, and it could operate at a loss because it doesn't really matter, because the people that fund Fox News are the people that are going to get the tax cuts, are going to get the benefit of spreading right-wing propaganda. MSNBC is just trying to make money. Make money, make money. CNN, same deal. CNN, to me, is of the three ones with opinions, if you could call it that, I guess, because I guess ABC, NBC, they do have their biases, but they're more they have less of opinion pieces. CNN is probably, if I had to say, the most quote centrist, and that's not necessarily to say that they're unbiased. That's the other distinction that we have to make when we talk about media outlets. Because a media outlet is centrist does not make them unbiased. Well, it begs the question then, what is the bias of MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News if they're broader than just the ideological ties to a party or to a set of ideals? Well, I already said it. It's money. The reason they barely ever have left-leaning people on there is because left-leaning people are going to call for organizing labor. They're going to call for boycotting things. They're going to call for measures that could possibly lose the network money. There's a reason why they got rid of Cenk Uygur on MSNBC. You can have your qualms with him. There's a reason why they will never give people like Sam Cedar a full show on MSNBC, or they'll never give David Pakman a show on CNN. They'll never do it. These alternative people, the independent media people on the left, will never, ever be accepted by the mainstream media because they are calling the power dynamics out of a system that is rigged against not only them, because they're more the successful people in the system, but against the people that are the working class people, the middle class people, people in poverty. They're calling out this stuff constantly, and that's not going to fly when you're on corporate media. The difference between the left and the right on this spectrum is that right-wing independent media will be welcomed on mainstream outlets. That's why you get Ben Shapiro on Fox News all the time. You can get Candace Owens on Fox News anytime you want. It's also to a little bit ignore the fact that right-wing media now owns so many of the outlets of local news media, whether that be print or whether that be TV. It doesn't matter because all of them are just blanketed with right-wing bias because they're owned by maybe not multinational, but national conglomerations of corporations that just come in, they buy out the local media, and that's it. And then you're screwed. So you're that local TV station, boom, Sinclair Media now. Or whatever. There's a few of them. But it's crazy that they, well, it's not crazy that they allow it to fly, I should say, but it's crazy that it does. And that it's so blatant. The overall bias of Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, ABC, NBC, any of these acronyms is money, corporate greed. They don't hire people that are going to call out the power dynamics. They very rarely bring on people to represent that opinion on the opinion pieces. So every once in a while, you'll get Kyle Kalinske, you'll get David Pakman, you'll get Sam Cedar, you'll get Cenk Uygur, you'll get Anna Kasparian, you'll get Ben Dixon. And you know what? It's funny because Ben Dixon is probably the most far left leaning person I've ever seen get on MSNBC. And the only reason why they let him on is because of the Michael Bloomberg stuff that he called out. If he didn't, would they let him on? I don't know. I highly doubt it. And the only reason why Sam Cedar gets on MSNBC is because he's buddies with Chris Hayes, and that's not to knock it, because Chris Hayes is, if I had to rank all of the outlets, anchors, Chris Hayes would be my number one best, representing a left-wing bias. Because, let's be honest, they're going to have bias. Anchors are going to have bias. If they're presenting anything but just the raw facts, and even if they are having the raw facts, individual anchors will have bias. So if I'm talking about anchors that actually can represent people like us, Chris Hayes would be number one. There's pretty big drop-off from there. But, you know, like I said, Sam Cedar gets on there because he's friends. At least he's friendly with Chris Hayes. David Pakman, no longer allowed on Fox News. They don't, I mean, Jon Stewart is not like this crazy left-winger, but they don't like have him come on TV anymore either. I don't know if that's by his choice or not, but like even someone like that who's not that radical, it's like, it's crazy. And then you'll have Fox News that just hires these like just token Democrats or token like quote liberals. And it just gives a false sense of like what a liberal is, what a leftist is, and the distinctions between them. Like nobody knows the distinctions between those things, unless you're like maybe you do if you're listening to this, but the vast majority of people don't know the difference between a liberal and a leftist. So they just assume, oh, you know, CNN is not Fox News, so it has to be left wing. And if you cry wolf long enough, if you're the Republican Party that has been, and every conservative person that has run for office, or every person that has been on right-wing media and just complained about liberal media, yeah, then what happens is you get treated with kid gloves. Every time you go on there, you treat it with kid gloves. It's crazy. Because if you call out a lie, it's deemed to be liberal media or your liberal bias because, everyone has their own facts. Everyone can make up their facts. It's crazy how in an instant you can see conservative people who could knock postmodernism all day long and then just deny that there's any sort of reality or an objective reality or an objective fact. That just everything is subjective. It's funny because if you look at modern or postmodern art, they would just knock it all day long. That's a generalization, obviously, but from everything I've seen. So, ultimately, money is it. How does it operate that way? Other than, so let's unplug now the piece of, okay, you're owned by a national corporation. Okay, that's fine, I guess. So let's take that for what it is. Now what? Well, let's look at it this way. Let's just take CNN, because I said I gave them the most centrist award. If you take CNN, you watch for 15 minutes. Okay, yeah, it's whatever. Just could be good, could be bad. Depends on your opinion, right? let's just say objectively, they did pretty good, 10 minutes. Well, what happens for that 4 minutes? That 4 minutes are commercials. What's on those commercials? Well, if I had to guess, and you could pause it right now, if you hear this, take a guess as to what the commercials are. And I can guarantee you that there's at least one, if not two or three, commercials on prescription drugs that tell you to ask your doctor about this, ask your doctor about that. Because guess what? Those prescription drug manufacturers, they pay a ton of money to get on mainstream outlets during that commercial break. They want you to see that commercial over and over and over again so that you go out and buy it. What also is implicit in that is that you don't bite the hand that feeds you. So you think Wolf Blitzer or let's say Chris Wallace. We'll give Fox News their moderate anchor. You think that they're going to go out there and start criticizing the pharmaceutical drugs or the pharmaceutical companies that are the ones that are paying for the commercials on their network? And if you think they do that, do you think they're going to have a job for very long? Because the network heads that control the network, you think they're going to just let that fly? They won't. You'd be gone in an instant. I'd be gone in an instant. But the people that they hire, generally speaking, there are exceptions. There are times where I can say, hey, you know what, that opinion I can agree with, and you know what, I'm surprised they let it on. It happens. It's rare, but it happens. And I think it might have to start changing more, and maybe over time we're starting to see some changes in that sense of like, okay, you know, Bernie Sanders is doing pretty well, so maybe we should have some people that actually represent that. But for the vast majority, those people that are on the news networks are hired for the reason that they will not call that stuff out. Now, let's also, okay, so let's say you got a pharmaceutical drug company in there. Okay, that's one commercial. There's multiple commercials, right? Well, what could be the rest? Have you ever noticed that every once in a while, maybe more than a once in a while, if you watch CNN, MSNBC, or Fox News enough, that you see commercials for goods or services that you can't buy? Now, what can I mean by that? Have you noticed when there are commercials for like ExxonMobil? Not for the gas stations, but just, you know, the company. Or there's commercials for Boeing. You can't buy an airplane. 99.999% of people that are watching cannot buy an airplane. So what are they doing? That advertising is exactly what I'm making it seem. I'm not going to call it a bribe, but it's legal what they're doing. And subjectively immoral. They can do it. And they do it. And really, why wouldn't you? If you were ExxonMobil and you can pay, what is it, $1 million to have your commercials run, and you get very, very, very little, if anything at all, because they barely cover anything that is showing the greed of corporations. If you get anything, It'll be extremely minor on how they hit you, if at all. It's crazy because literally you or I cannot buy anything from ExxonMobil directly other than gas, and they're not advertising their gas. And you cannot buy an airplane. You cannot buy the defense stuff that is being made by Boeing or many, many more of these corporations that I just can't think of off the top of my head. But you can watch and you'll see. Tons of banks advertise. Tons and tons of banks. Now, again, at least you can say like, oh, well, you can get a checking account or a saving account. Yeah, you're right. You can do that. Inherently, they're advertising for a different reason. That's the reason why independent media is so much better. Independent media, if they're honest with you, they're gonna tell you what their biases are. You know, if you watch the Majority Report, you know where they stand. They're not making it a secret. They're not going to lie to you and say, well, I'm pretty centrist. Now, I might think what centrist is different from what you think is centrist or what the average American might think is centrist, but they're going to tell you that in the grand scheme of American politics, they're on the left. Or watching David Pakman. You know where he stands. I think that some of the right-wing people are definitely way, way more disingenuous, so like Dave Rubins and types like that. But you know what? It's incumbent upon us to call out that stuff and to make things that counteract that. And that's why knowing that liberal media is a myth, because they're going to claim that everything under the sun is liberal media this, liberal media that. You can't do this, that. Because, the fact checkers are actually liberal too. And the facts themselves are liberal. So you can't believe the facts. You can't believe anything about wealth inequality because that's liberal media. Or healthcare. Can't believe any of that stuff. So, inherently, looking into the biases of whatever you're listening to is important, or watching is important, or reading. It's not the end-all be-all. You should be pushing yourself to be beyond... You know what? If you are a right-winger and you made it this far and listening to this, props to you. Because this is what you need to do. If you're a left progressive and you're listening to this, you do have to go out and listen to people like Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder and Candace Owens. You do. You have to know what they're saying. You have to listen to Fox News. You have to listen to CNN every once in a while. You have to do this stuff because otherwise you're not ever going to know how to counteract and fight. Or know what's true and what's not true. Or what they're saying is true and what is actually true. So it's important, and it's incumbent upon people like me that's making this podcast, or like people that are on independent media, to call that stuff out. And that's why I'm here. So with that, I can give a closing remark here and just say that I don't believe in liberal media. I don't believe in the myth of there being a grand conspiracy of mainstream media being left-leaning. It's complete BS. And actually, I think a lot of it is just corporate bias. It's 100% just based on money and how much money they can make. And that's what a corporation is. So why wouldn't they do that? It's mainstream media outlets, you know. They're not making money for being one way or the other necessarily. They're just making money. So whatever they have to do to make more money, they'll do it. You're not listening to somebody like me that's recording in a basement. They're not listening to people that are, recording out of a little studio and just putting out their genuine opinions. These are people that are paid to do what they're doing. specifically to represent the interests of people that are not you or me. Well, thank you again for checking out this episode number 4 of the Kano Show. If you haven't already, please do follow me on social media. Share all the previous episodes if you would like. And please, if you would even like to be a guest on the show, let me know and I'll make it happen. So thank you guys so much for listening. I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.